you were an end and never a mere means. Need to think about that one for a while. Always treat other people as an end and never as a mere means. Now, my West Texas boy's way of saying that is don't use folks. Don't use them. That means don't hire them at Burger King so you can make extra money as an assistant manager so you can, because you're using them. That's what I meant about it would make official economy impossible to follow that moral rule. You can't use folks. Don't use them. Because the ends principle tells you that you treat your own life as an end. In other words, you don't treat yourself as a means, generally speaking. You treat your activities as ends. I mean, well, this is me. I'm doing it. It's an end. But when you treat someone instrumentally, it's not what happens. Frequently, and this comes up at Duke University, and it probably comes up in dating out in the more adult world of multi-singles, polymorphousness, and all, you know, all the new talk shows, Oprah and whatever. Dating is frequently not a relation that obeys the principle of ends. Frequently, the situation is one in which somebody is supposed to use someone else as a means to an end. Well, it's wrong, according to Kant, because you should never treat any person, including yourself, by the way, as a mere means, but only as an end. That's the ends principle. Connected to that and connected to the imperative is one that I think is worth fighting over. I said I deeply believe in some principles. This is one I deeply believe in. The principle of freedom, which is we must always act under the practical postulate that our will is free. Now here's what Kant's saying, and I think it's worth remembering. That we all have these arguments that we can't do anything about something, and that so much stuff's going on, how can I help? For Kant, none of that works. It's all excuses. Later, Sartre will call it bad faith. The practical postulate under which you should morally act is that you're free. Now, why does Kant call it a practical postulate? It's simple. Because you can't show that you're free. You may not even be free. In other words, you could even be in prison, as Sartre says, or you could be determined by psychological, social factors, whatever. But you should act under the practical postulate that your moral decision makes a difference. Now, if you've noticed so far, all Kant's doing is giving us an account of what a lot of folks think the, moral action is anyway. Sort of, maybe this one's controversial, but we'll see. In any case, that practical postulate is one that you've all adopted today, whether you knew it or not, because hardly anyone gets up in the morning and dresses themselves as a cleverly constructed automaton and says, I wish I could freely do something today, but since there was the Big Bang and I know the laws of physics and biology and behavioral science, that means I'm going to go through the day like an automaton. No, practically speaking, you got up and went, hell, I'm going to go to the talks, right? As though you were free to do it. And you're here, great. But it's funny when we turn to politics, we forget this. We go, well, there's just nothing I can do. Well, Sartre called that bad faith. Because you just act, in other respects, you act under a practical postulate. Namely, act as though you're free. You might get lucky. You might be free. Who knows? Act that way. It's worth trying. I mean, it's better than being a slave to try that. Well, anyway, this is not some lefty idea. This is the greatest bourgeois ethicist. I mean, this is your own revolution, folks. Yeah? Now, connected to the principle of freedom is one I'm equally attached to, the principle of autonomy. Always act so that you can regard your own will as making universal law. Now, this is more responsibility than most people want. This means that when you decide, you ask this question. You decide autonomously. That means not under the will of another. In here, autonomously, in your heart, in your mind. And autonomy is a beautiful word. You act autonomously. Now, what does it mean What does it mean to regard your own will here as making universal law? It means this, that you would be willing for everyone else to act just as you did. So that if you make a perfect ass of yourself and you do it autonomously, you're at least willing that everybody else do it, and you may be. See, that's not inconsistent with autonomy. On the other hand, autonomy is a frightening principle, because even Kant says, if God himself were to come down and to give you a moral directive, if you followed it, that would be non-moral. It wouldn't be wrong, but it wouldn't morally count. If God said, go over there, and you did it, it'd be okay, but it wouldn't be moral. Moral stuff comes from you, the decisions you make, not from the decisions others make for you. So if you're a patriot because everybody else is, even if you decided to agree with them, it isn't worth diddly. Not morally. It has to come from you. So for me, that's a powerful principle. It's the principle of autonomy. Now Kant sort of caps this off now by returning in a strange way to our earlier questions about what human beings are like. And then one last point, and I'm through with Kant. I hope I'm on. Yeah, okay. Kant says that the human capacity to be a moral agent, just that capacity that we have to ever act morally. And remember, this is not some loony argument. Kant is procedurally describing what moral behavior would look like, while just holding to one side the question of whether very many people ever actually act this way. He's just saying if there's moral action, it's got to look like this. It can't be some smidgy thing about, well, I'm nice. It can't be that. That's his argument anyway. The human capacity to be a moral agent in this strong sense gives each human what Kant calls, and what I think is worthy of calling, dignity. And dignity for Kant means an unconditional worth. Human dignity means that each one of these newly constructed bourgeois individuals has an unconditional worth, which, as an insight I think many of us share. You hear of a settlement of a wrongful death suit, and all of us can feel the pain of the judge trying to put a dollar amount on it. Why? Because we know from this Kantian insight and our own autonomous insight that a human life doesn't have that kind of value. It's not a quantitative value, because that human being could be a moral agent. The value of that life is unconditional, which means it's not a monetary one. It has an unconditional value. Now, the sort of last part of Kant, and then we're through with him for a while, the last part is where he ties all this up, and he says all this so far is about how individuals act and what they are if there's morals, if there's a moral law. But if each one of us acted this way in regard to each other one of us, we would be in a state that Kant calls the kingdom of ends. A kingdom of ends would be a place where all of us in our mutual relations with one another treated each other as ends and not as mere means, where each one of us granted the other his or her autonomy, and were similarly granted our autonomy, in which each one of us decided autonomously on our freedom and was granted the same right by each and every other one.